private jet. You can go all around the world. This is how they're buying them one by one. They're buying these names, who are then given enormous privileges. They're given UN passports so that they can't be accused of the crimes if they kind of injure a prostitute or the things they get up to, or they get complete immunity from any sort of prosecution, and they get privileged status, they get limousines wherever they go, and of course, to the little people who operate in showbiz, this all goes to their heads. They start feeling important, and they enjoy it, and so they are effectively bought. And this is happening all over the world now. And unfortunately, there's only a few very tiresome people like me who are saying, just a moment, I've read this document, I've never seen anything so appalling in all my life, can we please stop this nonsense straight away? Now, fortunately, I am getting the media are beginning to become a little kinder, because I think some of them have realized that once you establish a world dictatorship, one of the things that dictatorships tend to do is to start messing around with the freedom of the media. Now, at the moment, of course, the media have become not so much mirrors of the establishment of the Times used to like to call itself. They're now its poodles, but they might not want to be its poodles forever. And I think some of them are beginning to realize that if they go on peddling this global warming nonsense and allowing the environmental correspondents to be the lions of the newsroom, when previously they were always in some odd corner and got a few column inches a year, if they go on doing that, then the likelihood is that this dictatorship will eventually decide to come along and start interfering with the freedom of the press, or even with the right of the press to exist. Let me tell you one thing they're going to do.
I know they want to do something with the net.
They're going to say that one of the biggest sources of garbage in the world is newspapers, and they're going to forbid the newspapers to be printed because it's a waste of resources. That's the sort of thing that's going to happen. And eventually, when a few of the news media begin to wake up, and one or two of them are beginning, then suddenly the worm will turn, and this whole program will be flung into retreat. Now, I don't know whether we can stop this at Copenhagen, but I can tell you this. If they don't get this legally binding treaty that they would like to get at Copenhagen, this is their last chance saloon. It's not the last chance for the planet. It's the last chance for the world government wannabes, because if they don't get this through, then it will become apparent as yet another year without any major rise in global temperature passes, that it's becoming impossible to sustain the notion that somehow within the rest of this century there's going to be a 5 or 6 Celsius or a 10 Fahrenheit degree in temperature warming. It's just not going to happen. Nobody's going to believe it. They're trying to drive it through now because they know that every opinion poll shows that public support for this nonsense is collapsing with a greater rapidity than any other subject I've ever seen in opinion polls. That's been the same in Canada, the United States, Britain and Australia, and in New Zealand.
Do you know,
all of these, the people are fed up.
Do you know how I can tell when something is rotten that's going on the world stage? I'll tell you.
Tell me your method. I have my own.
Well, I'll tell you one of the ways I look and I can tell quickly is speed. The minute you have massive speed and coordination to push something through, you know that there has been a plan for a long time. When all of a sudden there's a synchronization to speed and push it through, and the people are called in all over the media to push it, and in the massive gravitational push so that it can't be stopped. It is like going into...
That is exactly what is happening.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting. The plan, in fact, for this particular scam happened a very, very long time ago now. It happened, in fact, in 25 years ago, when Sir Maurice Strong, a Canadian UN bureaucrat, deliberately set up, and said he was deliberately setting up the UN's climate panel as a political rather than a scientific body, precisely so that he could eventually turn it into a world government. He said at the time, incautiously, I think, that that's what he was going to do. Many others, from Gorbachev to Jacques Chirac to Al Gore, have made the same points about their desire to see this hideous mechanism turned into a world government. And so it has been very long in the planning. They had thought that they'd managed to capture all the major media, that they'd managed to get the people where they wanted them, and then literally about a year ago, the cracks in the dam began to show. The opinion polls began going rapidly the other way, long before even the ClimateGate emails that told us how nasty the plotters in the scientific world were. Even before we knew that, it was very, very clear that the public were going off this idea. And it wasn't just because of recession either. It was because one thing that Joe Public is very good at spotting is when he's being lied to systematically. You can get away with a lie for a short time, but in the end, the sheer shrillness of the propaganda begins to irritate the ordinary guy. And then if he listens to somebody like me, just quietly expounding the truth, as I'm trying to do now, he can tell the difference. And that's when the ordinary guy says, well, I can't work out whether Monkton knows the science better or whether the UN's climate panel knows the science better. But I can tell that the UN's climate panel and its supporters are becoming hysterical in their desire to make me believe something which is not a matter of belief. Science is not a belief system. And I'm not prepared to be bullied. And I think that's why the opinion polls are turning. It's because people aren't prepared to be bullied. And they're saying, we're not going to be told by these bureaucrats, by the great and the good, by our governors, by our teachers, by our academics, by our media, how we should think for ourselves on an issue like this. We're going to start thinking for ourselves. Of course, the moment anybody starts checking any of the science on this, they immediately turn away. I'll give you a story on this. There was a guy called Andrew Tyree, a very senior member of the Conservative opposition in London at the moment. Now, he began to look at the science because his party is told by its leader that you have to believe in global warming. But he decided to check for himself just to make sure. And he found, as anybody who's got half a brain who checks it, that the whole thing's nonsense. So he went to see David Cameron, the true believer who leads the Conservative Party, not really a Conservative, but he leads the Conservative Party anyway. And he said to him, look, David, I think we do have a problem here. He was very nice about it. He said, I've looked at the science and I really don't think we can go on pretending that global warming's a problem. We're going to look silly when it eventually becomes apparent that it isn't. And David Cameron's reaction was to sack him on the spot, to fire him, throw him out of the shadow cabinet, cast him back onto the back benches where he has very little influence. Because the true believers are not willing to have anyone, however politely, questioning any aspect of the superstition in which they so fervently believe, rather than checking.
Isn't it like the Dark Ages?
The ordinary guy can see this. Yeah, sorry, you go next.
It's very much like the Dark Ages. I mean, I cannot believe the fervor, the zealotry, the religious spirit that has encompassed this subject. I'm stupefied.
That is the thing. It isn't, of course, a religion, it's a superstition. Because the Christian religion, if you're old-fashioned like me, is true. And you believe it to be true. And you know that that's a matter of belief. You can't prove it to anyone else, but you believe it. And I believe it. But these people, they are believing not in a religion, but in a superstition. And a superstition is something which we can demonstrate by scientific methods to be false. Mm-hmm. You can't demonstrate the Christian religion by scientific methods to be false because when Almighty God made the universe, the rules of the universe, which are the laws of physics, only came into being a fraction of a second after he said, let there be light, and there was light. And we now know that that was 13.7 billion years ago. We can measure when it was. But the fact is, we can never, therefore, question whether or not there was a God by any scientific means. Therefore, it is legitimate intellectually to believe in God if we wish to do so. But to believe in this chimera of climate change is not respectable because it is testable by science. It has been tested by measurement at everywhere from the oceans to the clouds to the tropical upper troposphere and to outer space itself. And at every point, all the way up the atmospheric column, from the surface of the sea to outer space, there have been measurements taken which fundamentally disprove the key assumptions on which the computer models, on which the entire edifice of climate change, alarmism, are based. Every single aspect of those models has been proven by measurement to be wrong. And therefore, you can only believe in climate change if you are a superstitious believer and not a religious believer. This is a superstition, not a religion.
That's an interesting point. Another thing that was very interesting in my original due diligence with this subject is to understand that looking at climate requires that we look at the context of time always when we make an assertion about climate or weather, that You're taking a snapshot of something, but you have to say to the public,